Portfolio Composer, episode 158.
You're listening to the Portfolio Composer podcast with your host and coach Garrett Hope, where he teaches you what it takes to master the business end of writing music through mindset, marketing, and business skills. Make sure to sign up for the newsletter at theportfoliocomposer.com for exclusive offers, business insights, and information not shared on the podcast. And now, for this episode of the Portfolio Composer.
So if you want to do this, you want to invest in your business. And so make sure your workplace is very presentable. Make sure your samples are the top quality you can afford so that your product is the highest quality that people can buy. So that you don't want your only attractiveness as a potential hire is that you're cheap. You also want to be the Porsche that I'm really happy that I hired you because you're this amazing thing. I want to pay you a lot of money.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Portfolio Composer. I am your host, your coach, your teacher, Garrett Hope. If you've been listening to this podcast for any time at all, you will know that one of my overriding philosophies, and the reason I'm doing this podcast is because I firmly believe that composers are small business owners. If you file a Schedule C or you earn 1099 income as a composer, you are a business. The IRS considers you to be a business. So in order to succeed as a business, we need to ask ourselves, what are the things that small businesses do and how do they become profitable? That includes marketing, networking, mindset, and a whole bunch of related business skills. And this interview and episode is no exception. I'm really pleased to introduce all of you to composer Jacob Yoffee. Welcome, Jacob.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So let me tell you a little bit about Jacob. He is currently the resident composer for the American Studio Orchestra, and he's based in Los Angeles, writing primarily for film, television, and trailer music projects. And in fact, as a feature film composer, Jacob has scored over 20 feature-length projects. In 2013, he scored Pawn, an action thriller starring Oscar winner Forrest Whitaker, Ray Liotta, Michael Chiklis, and Common and a Resurrection, and a horror picture starring Misha Barton and the late, great Michael Clark Duncan. His music has been featured in the trailer campaigns for Star Wars: The Force Awakens, Disney's The Jungle Book, Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Men Tell No Tales, Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, Spielberg's The BFG, Kubo and the Two Strings, The Hobbit, Desolation of Smog, X-Men, Days of Future Past, and The Chronicles of Riddick. And more than that, he is an Ivy League music-educated individual with graduate degrees from Peabody and other schools. So this is going to be an incredible conversation. But Jacob, I want to start with talking about one of these film trailers, if that's okay.
Sure.
One of the things that I do in my portfolio of income-producing activities is I teach as an instructor at the local university, and I teach the history of rock and roll class. And when I'm talking about the Beatles, I'm talking about the power of George Harrison's, songwriting, especially near the end of their career. And I begin to point out to the students that this music surrounds us, and it's so embedded in our culture that they can't escape it. And one of the things I play for them is the trailer for Kubo and the Two Strings. Because that music is one of the most incredible arrangements of While My Guitar Gently Weeps that I've ever heard. So I want to hear about that. What was your involvement and how did you craft that music?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, when the Jungle Book trailer released, Leica was working on Kubo and the Two Strings, and they hadn't released their first trailer yet. They had been working with, some composers and a trailer house in LA, and the president of Leica he said it just wasn't quite hitting because they had licensed the use of the song. It's in the film. And they licensed the use of the song for the trailer campaign, so they really wanted to utilize it, but it had to feel like a trailer still. It had to feel very epic. And so when the Jungle Book trailer dropped, the president of Leica, this is what I'm told, emailed the trailer house and said, go watch this trailer. That's the energy that I want. I want that for Kubo and the Two Strings. So they contacted my agent because he had done a little PR push out and said, hey, we just did a Jungle Book trailer here, just check it out. So they knew who had done the music. And they asked me to come in, and I watched some of the rough cuts of the first trailer, and kind of talked ideas, and then I had to get to work. They said, here's the deal. We've got the rights to the song, so just try to come up with something, and it's got to fit this emotion and this sort of arc and amount of time. And we had to just start sketching right away. I think I had 4 days to turn around a piece of music for that. And I threw a bunch of ideas at them, and they just sort of either go back and forth with feedback. But this is a situation where you've got to do it all with your computer extremely quickly. No live players, so I was using different samples and recordings that I've done on my own to try to make it work. But I mean, come on, it was so amazing to get to use the Beatles' music.
Right.
It was just so inspiring, It's incredible.
Well, I want to know more about that. Because this seems to be an exception to the rule. I mean, my understanding is most trailers are really, the music editor has compiled as many as 30 to 40 different cuts from separate music things in order to tell the narrative of a 3-minute trailer. Whereas you seem to have actually scored the trailer. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, most of the trailers that I've done have all been custom scored. That's what they call it, just custom scored trailers. And when I first came to LA, I tried to write trailer tracks and submit them. And I landed a few little things here and there, but most, I'd say 90% of the trailer work I've done has been, they call me up and say, hey, can you write a trailer track like this? We need this very specific thing. And so it's completely sculpted towards what they're asking for, and it's not really all that trailery. It's most of the success I found is when I start with a very small orchestral idea and then try to build that and make it feel beefy and huge and more epic, rather than being I need to write something just gigantic, this hybrid, dirty, grungy, loud thing. So it's very much like scoring a short film.
So you don't start by opening up your storm drum and getting a good percussion sound?
No, yeah, I'm all about I go for the Spitfire audio, the center samples. I try to get, as real sounding orchestra as possible. And then when you need to, you start bringing in, the more familiar trailery stuff, the Inception bois, those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But it always starts orchestral.
How did you get into this kind of work? What was the process of becoming a trailer composer?
My agent pushed me into it big time. When I think around 2011, his company, they were really trying to get into it. So he was pushing everyone on his roster, write trailer tracks. And I think the first thing that happened was I just wrote this piece of music that caught the ear of a trailer editor who was working for Paramount on the Avengers campaign. He was working at Paramount, but randomly was working on the Avengers campaign, and it ended up not getting used. But then he sent that track to someone who was working on the Iron Man 3 campaign, and the track never got used for anything, but my name started to circulate among the picture editors that work in the trailer industry. And then when Star Wars started to crop up, I got a call from a guy, and he said, hey, can you start throwing together ideas for Star Wars? We need to put together a teaser. And so I came up with a track that was a boys' choir version of Binary Sunset. Because in my mind, I said, oh man, Star Wars, this has got to be...
That's one of the classic themes.
Yeah, the classic theme. And I mean, it was neck and neck with other, pieces of music for a long time, but that never got used, or ultimately didn't get used But again, that MP3 was emailed around. I don't know how many people, even for Rogue One, they were still trying to use that. So it's still kind of in circulation. But another person that I'd never met somehow got my information and called me and said, "Hey, I'm working on Star Wars. Can you write some music for me?" You know, and it's basically just you're doing it all on spec. But you start to collaborate with these picture editors because, for all intents and purposes, in the trailer world, these picture editors are directors. You know,
Sure.
they work with a producer and they're given, you know, footage, and they have to come up with a story to tell, whether it's a 75-second teaser or a 3-minute, you know, trailer behemoth. And, you know, they use library music, but often what they're trying to do, especially on these higher end franchises, they're really trying to raise the bar. So they want to tell really good stories. And so you work with them and try to sculpt it. And it doesn't work every time, but it is, man, it's so exciting, especially just to get to work with these iconic themes. And just like when it does land, it's amazing to see it just set the internet ablaze. You see it shared on Facebook, and you can email the trailer to everybody, and everybody has 90 seconds to watch it, you know?
Right.
Which is just wonderful.
You said a few things I want to follow up on. The most recent was being, you wrote these on spec? I mean, you're putting in a tremendous amount of time with no guarantee that it's going to be used or you're going to get paid for it. Is that the norm?
Correct. That is absolutely the norm. And now that I've been working in the industry longer, you get what are called demo fees or kill fees. And you know, these companies, they're not terrible. They basically, if you're a newbie, then they're not going to pay everybody, you know, to submit custom spec demos. But once you're in it, you're going to get something. It's just a very small fraction of what it would be if you had landed a spot. But it's not something you can't really make a living off of these demo fees.
You actually need to land the sync because that's where the real money is, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And the money can be great, especially the larger the franchise, especially the amount. The length of your track is extremely important. How much of it are they really using? So it's it's definitely stressful, and you can feel the stress. I always tell people, especially people that aren't really aware, they think oh, it must be so easy to do the trailer as opposed to doing a feature. And I'm no, the trailers actually are more stressful than working on a lot of the feature-length projects I've done or the TV shows. You just, because every second is analyzed by so many people, and it's marketing. So there's just a lot of pressure on these things because they've got to be fantastic.
You know, yesterday...
Millions of dollars are at stake.
Oh, yeah, millions. Yesterday, I just had a kind of a viewing session with these directors. I'm scoring their film. So we were looking at the second reel that I had just finished scoring. And, you know, they get nitpicky down to the hits and the timbre, and I don't know about that. But I can imagine this is magnified 100-fold for trailers. Yes.
And it is sort of crazy too, because you have to just understand where they're coming from, because they're very stressed and they want the music to be amazing, and it has to be. And they have, the footage is incredible. They're taking $100 million film and taking the best bits and making a really quick compilation. And so the footage is $1 million footage. And so the music has to sound that way, but you have to write it almost overnight or even just in a couple hours with your computer. And then they'll say, "Oh, it sounds kind of synthy." And I'm because it is synth. This is all fake, but that's not an acceptable response. You have to say, okay, let me try to reprogram it and remix it. And of course, as composers, we are sort of shooting ourselves in the foot because all of us are working so hard that we keep raising the bar. So every time a new library is released or somebody goes and records really quickly some live elements to add it, then they say, okay, that's the new standard. That's like, we want all our tracks should sound like that good. Which is, it makes it better. So I feel like it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just adds more pressure each and every time. It's definitely intense.
So are you under contract yet to do the Star Wars film that's going to come out this Christmas?
There is no contract. There's just the on-spec, just working, collaborating with the just different picture editors. I have been working and submitting music for that film, and it's been pretty exciting. It's been a constant now for I think last 2 months.
Really? I mean, we're talking in July. The film gets released in December. So you're saying in May, 7 months before it's supposed to be released, they're already working on the trailer.
Oh yeah. I was working on the teaser that released already. I don't know, back in January or maybe even earlier. I forget when it released in March. So yeah, it was definitely maybe even over the Christmas break. So yeah, absolutely, very early out because you're throwing ideas. At this point, the people that I'm working with, I consider them friends. These are just artistic peers, and so I'm very excited. If there's a picture editor to say, hey, I got this idea. I want to land this thing. There's a new film coming out. And can you throw me some ideas like this? Like, absolutely, I'm going to do that. And now I'm comfortable sending, a piece of music that I would consider a sketch. It's not a finished, fully polished, mixed, and mastered track. These people understand what the production process on the music side will be like. And if they say, hey, we really like this track, can you develop it even more? Can you make it flesh out the orchestration? Can you make it more hybrid, bombastic? This part here sounds a little synthy. What can you do about that? So and they understand where I can take it. So it's a wonderful process, and I don't mind the spec thing because when we do land one, the payout is good enough that it definitely feels like it's worth it.
Got it. So let's say you get the gig and they choose to use your music for the trailer, and there's going to be probably 2 or 3 theatrical versions, which are going to be in the 3-minute range. And so would each of those be uniquely scored? And then you would have like the 1 minute and then the 30-second version, and then there's probably even a 15-second version that's going to go on social media. So would you do all of those?
No, there's definitely a handful of composers that are getting called to throw in. I mean, there's more than a handful, but there's a handful that seem to be kind of landing the work regularly. And I'd say that Star Wars is probably the only franchise where John Williams is actually coming in and getting involved with the trailers. So at this point, he may even come in after the cut has been approved and score it himself. And that's what happened on The Force Awakens, where you work with a picture editor and write music and help them develop a cut, a trailer that everyone says, this is it, we like this. And then they'll actually buy the music because you helped create it and helps create this trailer. But then they'll hand it over to John Williams and let him score the film fresh. So basically you helped create the temp score, which helps create the edit, and then he'll score it. So that does happen, and that could happen again. But for every trailer, they're trying to make it's a completely, like, everyone's throwing ideas out. And so just because you did one does not mean you're going to get any of the others at all. There's no guarantee. They're just picking their favorite each and every time.
So, I mean, this can really only happen with a film with a franchise as large as Star Wars and with the budget of Disney behind it. Because, I mean, they're throwing tens of thousands of dollars around just to create these trailers. And then you bring Williams in, and he's probably going to want to hire a real orchestra. So then your 3-minute track becomes a $100,000 endeavor.
Absolutely. More than that. Absolutely. Very expensive. Yeah, I know one of the Force Awakens trailers, he scored it, and they did it with full orchestra in LA.
And it sounded great.
It did. Yeah, it did. It sounded fantastic. It is. I don't think there are many trailers that are many films that merit that, but that's the most exciting thing about working on a lot of these larger franchises, though, is that you feel the excitement that everyone has. It's not just business as usual. Everybody wants to create something amazing, all the way from, the people just working in the marketing department, people who aren't involved with like maybe the most creative side of the film. They want it to be amazing too. So everybody wants to raise the quality level, which is awesome. They're trying really hard. It's not just like, all right, let's make a bunch of money. It's like they really want to make something good.
So let's talk about how you get your music to stick then. If you and 24 other guys are submitting ideas to the trailer music house or the trailer house and the music editors or wherever, how do you get through there? How do you cut through the noise?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. One thing that I've learned when it comes to just working in music for media, it's sort of a catch-22. You've got to think very directly and very simply. You can't, especially if you're working with a track where you've had to create it all since. If you try to be too orchestral, too elegant, too dense, or heady, these editors, they're not going to really understand how to cut to it, because that's really the bottom line. They have to understand, how am I going to line up dialogue lines and shots to this. So they need to feel the beats of the music. And when I say beats, I don't really mean like, quarter notes. I mean like, here's a small phrase,
right?
There's like a second phrase, and then they feel it building. Words that picture editors use a lot are build and emotion, swell. They want to feel a sense of journey. They want to feel arrival. They want to feel like, okay, we're in the thick of it now. Because, I think the beginning of a trailer is usually the easiest part, to kind of pique someone's interest. And often, everyone knows the tropes now. You hear like just a single piano note and like a high string harmonic, or you hear like a low drum hit. There's like so many ways to start a trailer, or there's only so many ways that they end up doing it. But then where you go immediately after is the hard part. And that's what trailer editors are looking for, like what's going to pique their interest, but then they need to feel that emotional build. So if you're writing your own tracks, you've got to think that way. Like, is it simple enough that my brain understands it right away, but interesting enough to keep me engaged over the course of 90 seconds? And then I could continue to cut to it. So it's like kind of a weird balance to strike, like that sort of familiarity versus, sort of trying to cultivate like your own sound or try to push yourself orchestrationally.
Mm. And is this, I'm assuming, where the role of not just having a strong knowledge of orchestration comes in, but music production?
Yeah, orchestration and production are so crucial, I think. I feel like at least the jobs that I've been getting called for have been very challenging, because you've got to produce trailer sounds. It has to feel very it's got to be hitting on all frequencies. It's got to feel full. I read an interview with a trailer composer once, and he said the 4-letter word, the dirty word in trailer music is thin. You don't want your track to sound thin, right? But I think the sound of trailers are changing for a lot of these big franchise pictures, and they want something a little more. Like I've heard trailer editors say, I want something that sounds real. Like this sounds like real music. And it's just funny to hear them say that, because when you think of trailers, you think, oh, the big bombastic, like Lord of the Rings, loud, and like synth bass and humongous storm drums and all this. And now they're pushing away, and they want something that sounds like, oh wow, I hear woodwinds in there. Oh, there's like multiple bassoons playing like, chords. Like, they love that. They're starting to move towards that, which is really cool. But then trying to do that with your computer is very hard.
Yeah. So what are some tips that you could give us on how to make our music sound real? Because I got to tell you, before you get started, even when I'm writing for concert music, let's say I write a piece for a high school band, which is something I do a lot. I want to get those kids bought into the music as early as possible. So creating a viable demo is part of the process, and it needs to sound real. How do I do that?
Yes. Well, there's sort of the phenomenon of writing for the samples, right? I sometimes lament the days where there were no samples, and when you get hired as a composer, the client wouldn't really hear it until you're in the recording studio, and then they'd be either happy or completely upset with you. But you developed your skill for writing for live players from those experiences day in and day out. We're in a different situation nowadays because we have such great sample libraries, and so many projects finish with the demo, quote unquote, and we don't ever record live, and that's because we are writing for the samples. So you're coming up with an idea, and you might have a lyrical line, but then you try to play it in. Oh, that doesn't sound good. Let me change the line a little bit. Let me simplify it. Instead of doing like a leap of a sixth, let me just do a third. And so you start to change your ideas so that they can be more realistically envisioned by the tools that you have at your disposal. Now, you can think about that positively or negatively. Part of me thinks like, oh, my music is suffering. As an artist, I'm not growing because I'm limited by these samples. But at the same time, I think you end up with material to send out that has a higher quality to it. So it's just forcing you just to work with the tools that you have. And that's basically like how I try to think when I'm like, okay, let me try to do these ideas, and you push, and as with every sample library that comes out, it gets better. Your tools get better, so your music can get better.
So if I was going to summarize two things, write to the quality of the samples you have, which is why I really don't like writing for saxophones, because my saxophone samples sound awful.
Yes.
And then make sure you have high quality samples. So you have to invest in the tools.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is absolutely something that I tell any composers that want to, ask what they should do. And I say, make sure you invest in yourself. And when you finish a job and you have some money, whatever type of job you're hired to do next, invest in the highest quality samples you can afford to accomplish that job. Consider it part of the cost, as you would the cost of recording live musicians to finish the job. And the best thing about the samples is that once you buy them, you have them forever.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully the technology doesn't outpace the sample then, but you're probably good for a while.
Yeah, definitely. As long as they're contact libraries, I'm sure you're safe.
I'm interested in your story here of how you kind of transitioned from the academic side of music to the media side of music. Talk to me about that.
So yeah, when I initially went to school, I started at the Peabody Conservatory of Music, and I was a composition major. And my idea at that time was I want to go to school and I want to learn how to write for the orchestra, and then move to LA and be a film composer. When I got to school, I learned very quickly, like within the first day, that I would get yelled at if I said I liked film music, and that John Williams was awful and he was a thief and he stole. And I was like, oh, okay, people here do not like John Williams and they do not like film music. Got it. So I kept my mouth shut about that and just studied, the greats, which was a wonderful experience. At the same time, I, for the first time, was exposed to jazz, and as a saxophone player in high school, I just was like, wow, this music is incredible. And I ended up studying for over a decade with Gary Thomas, who is like a jazz legend. He toured with Miles Davis and Herbie Hancock and, I don't know, 180 other amazing musicians. So while I was at Peabody, I sort of stopped, or I kind of gave up the idea of doing film music and just said, I just love concert music and jazz, and I wanted to explore that. And after graduating with dual degrees in jazz and composition, I just made a living as a performer. And I was up in New York for rehearsals for a concert with Michelle Rosewoman, who's like a very, very kind of composition-heavy jazz artist. I mean, she has like extremely intricate, like crazy odd meter, not like atonal jazz that she plays, where you have to, in order to even do a concert, you've got to have like 10 rehearsals. The music's so difficult. So I was up in New York rehearsing with her, and one of the other musicians I was crashing with, they were a student at NYU, and he said, man, you got to go to this school and so you can move to New York, and they have a great film scoring program. Don't come here for jazz, come here for film scoring. And when I looked on the website, I noticed that one of the faculty members was a woman named Denise Hughes, and turns out she orchestrated the very film that made me want to be a film composer. And I had been getting the composing itch for some time, and when I saw that, I took it as a sign from above, and I applied that night for school, and I was just hell-bent. I was like, I have to study with this woman. And when I met her, she is a very intense, like such a driving personality. And the first semester with her was like composer boot camp. And she just really put us through the ringer, all our students, getting us ready for working in LA. So that sort of was like a long answer to that, but sort of kind of was a performer for a long time and then just kind of fell right back into composing overnight.
You've kind of alluded to it, but what has been one of the most surprising things in the difference between the two worlds, and why do you think there is a separation between kind of the academic model? I don't have better terms here. Maybe you can help me use better words, and the media model.
Yes. I mean, a lot of it comes down to pacing. And that's really the struggle that even today I always have to remind myself. There's simultaneously a slower pace of the unfolding of musical ideas in film and media, but at the same time, it's fast-paced delivery. And I'll have to explain that a little bit. You know, you take a piece by Mahler, 60 seconds of Mahler, it feels like 5 seconds of a pop song. It just, for him to unveil like a musical idea, it's very slow. It's so wonderful, but it just takes time. He needs a full-bodied symphony to really say what he's going to say. But in film, it's very snappy. And then, even if you look at picture editing from the 70s as opposed to today, it's so much slower back then. And so musically, we have to keep pace with that. And it's very, very difficult because when you come from, an academic world or the concert world, you sit down as an audience member and the ensemble begins the piece, and you don't realize how much time they're taking to sort of set you up and give you the melodies on a silver platter. It's very, it's catered to the music and not to like the visual moment. And so as audiences for a film, we're talking about frames and seconds. These are such small measures of time. And so musically, you kind of have to strip away everything and just get to the meat of it immediately, it's a real struggle for some of us coming from the academic world, where we were trying to write symphonies that were lasting 45 minutes. And then they're like, hey, we're doing a 15-second commercial. Can you give us a piece of music? And you're like, 15 seconds? So that's the main issue there. And so that's why, it's important to understand, I think, music from the academic world and concert music, because that's where you're going to draw all of your inspiration. But you have to study film music and love it and understand that it's not about like the complexity of the density of the orchestration or, the inventiveness of your chord structures and melody and all that. It's about the production and how quickly they can imbue emotions.
A lot of people, and myself included, I've dealt with this, feel like you can study one or the other and be a viable composer. Do you think that you can have both worlds at the same time?
I do. It's I think if you find your footing in the concert world and then you move into the film world, I think you won't work as often as someone who kind of has both feet firmly planted in the film music world. But I think you'll be very happy and welcomed with open arms because there are filmmakers who search for composers like that, and they're looking for people who aren't going to give them the norm or just, quote unquote, movie music. So I absolutely think there is a way to do that, and I think that wherever you're most comfortable is where you should live, and just hold true to your guns. And if you find that you're interested in film music, I think even if you've never done a film, you can find a filmmaker that says, okay, I want to hire you. I'm going to link you up with someone who has done this, and they're going to help you produce it. You're going to have like a music editor that'll help you, or an orchestrator, or somebody.
Mm-hmm. It's like they want John Crigliano then, right? A guy who teaches
exactly.
at Juilliard and can write these extremely mind-blowing scores.
Exactly. And I actually, one of my close friends, an older guy, he did his doctoral thesis on John Corigliano back in the 80s. And John Corigliano gave him his original handwritten score for Altered States.
No way.
Yeah. And so I got to study that. I had it for a couple months. And the story goes that, John Corigliano had never scored a film. And so they linked him up with a music editor who was taking John's ideas and making them work for the scene and sort of helping him through the process. But I mean, at the time, John Corigliano was doing such new orchestral techniques in the world of film that I don't know if it's true, but apparently he was here in LA trying to record the orchestra, and he was trying to teach them, this is how you do this, and this is how you do this. It just like blows my mind that you'd have to teach any musicians in LA anything.
Right. Then that's stuff that any traditional orchestral player would have seen, or at least if you're familiar with 20th century music, Penderecki and the like.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And didn't Altered States win some awards?
I think so. I can't say for sure, but that sounds right to me.
Yeah. I remember the Red Violin changing my world.
Oh, yeah.
And then he went and turned it into a concert suite. But it can go the other way. Like, I've had a composition lesson with Bruce Broughton, who made his career writing for films. And now that he's kind of past that part of his career, he's writing concert music. And John Williams has written trumpet concertos and concert music too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's happening more and more. And in LA, there are a lot of concerts that are cropping up where groups of composers are teaming together and putting on chamber music events. And they're using things like, pre-laid tracks and playing along with electronic, like even DJs, if you will. But it's very interesting. They're sort of trying to flex that compositional muscle in terms of live performance and continue to develop themselves as artists alongside, practitioners of media music, because I think it's easy to get swallowed up in that and you forget, like, who am I as a composer?
Right.
Because you're always asked to, all right, let's copy Hans Zimmer again,
Yep. Can you give us 3 business tips, actionable things that composers could do right now to grow their career, whether it's in media or the concert world?
Yes. It's interesting what I heard you say at the beginning. Well, the first thing I always say is you need to behave as a business, not just an artist, and think like a music producer. So if someone were to hire you for anything, you can't think, all right, I'm going to go and produce the song myself. Think, who are you going to hire to complete this project more fully, and that could be hiring other composers to help you. The most important advice that I received when I first came to LA was to develop a team, and that felt like a sort of dark and evil idea, like, oh, I don't want to be one of those composers that has a bunch of ghostwriters working for me. But that's not what they mean when they say that. Develop a team, develop a network of musicians that can, A, record themselves, ideally record themselves remotely so you can be in your studio. Hey, I need an amazing pop guitarist to lay down these riffs. You send them the sheet music over like a PDF, and then they email it back to you, and then you mix it into your sequencer. And if you have a cellist that can do that, a violinist, trumpet player, all these people, then if you get calls for a gig and you have to deliver something overnight or in a matter of hours, more than likely you'll be able to accomplish that if you have your team. And then outside of that, getting someone who can be your copyist, be an orchestrator. You need to make friends with as many mixing engineers as possible. Again, thinking like a music producer, but engineers work like crazy, and your favorite engineer may not be available. So make sure you've got 3 to 5 that you can call. And they all have different styles and strengths themselves. And they will teach you so much about audio, about the plugins, about compression, about all that. And we have to know that as composers. So develop a team. That's kind of more than one answer, but I feel like that is the single most important thing you can do if you want to make it in the music for media environment. And then the last thing I would say is invest in yourself and your workplace. I meet so many composers that they only have a laptop and like a tiny little M-Audio keyboard. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to work on music for media, these media projects that you want to score, they are at the very least, tens of thousands of dollar productions up to multi-million dollar productions. If they're going to use your piece of music, wouldn't they want something that sounds like $1 million quality? And so if you want to do this, you want to invest in your business. And so make sure your workplace is very presentable. Make sure your samples are the top quality you can afford so that your product is the highest quality that people can buy, so that you don't want your only attractiveness as a potential hire is that you're cheap. You also want to be the Porsche that I'm really happy that I hired you because like you're this amazing thing. I want to pay you a lot of money.
Right. Well, and if you try to compete on price alone, you're devaluing it. That's where you become a commodity. You need to compete on what you can actually do, what your value is. How can you tell this story better than anyone else?
Exactly. Yes. And
part of that is the quality of the sound.
Yes, that's everything. And we are spoiled in this day and age by all the great music and the great, the great venues and what people are used to hearing now. You have to match that.
You said invest in yourself. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think, and I have to thank my wife for this because I coming from the jazz world, I didn't want to rely on equipment ever, so I had my saxophone. But I wasn't the guy who would go out and buy all the newest gear, the new mouthpiece, the new fancy reeds, the new ligatures and all this. I was just like, I need to just be able to be good despite whatever equipment I have. But in terms of being a music producer and a composer, I think you have to realize that you are worth it. If you work really hard and you believe in yourself as a composer and your music, you're worth buying the $2,000 analog hardware synth to help you accomplish your ideas. And I think there's a fear that, that's for later. I need to just save this money and continue to work. And when I get bigger or I become famous or something, or when I get that right gig, then I'll go buy that stuff. And I think that's a dangerous road to walk down because I don't think anyone's ever going to tap you on the shoulder and say, okay, you're ready. You are now a professional.
Right.
You've got to really just take that leap of faith and invest in yourself and say, you know what, I'm going to spend $1,000 on this sample library, and I promise myself that I will work to learn how to use them. I will write tracks that will land placements. It's a scary thing, but that's what I consider investing in yourself. But it's more about believing in yourself and that you can be successful.
Do you ever invest in yourself in terms of training, getting someone to just help you, whatever that could be?
Yeah, that's where I consider it like the colleagues. I try to meet up with tons of composer friends, but also audio engineers. Some of my best friends in LA are mixing engineers and just audiophiles, and it's fascinating to hang out with them. And I ask them for tons of advice, and it has a lot to do with the equipment. Because again, coming from the academic kind of concert world to the studio electronic music world, I was very ignorant of a lot. So I had to learn everything by asking people. And you read, you use YouTube, like to study, and I buy scores constantly. Omni Music Publishing is a great company that releases actual hardbound film score releases. Like I just picked up Don Davis's score to The Matrix.
Nice. Just watched that yesterday again.
Yeah, and there's all these great tools, and so investing in yourself as far as your education is something I try to focus on whenever I get the chance.
Great. This has been absolutely incredible. I think that you and I could talk about this for a lot longer, but let's take a quick break right now and we'll come back for the lightning round.
All right.
I'm very excited to announce that the Portfolio Composer has become a strategic partner with the American Composers Forum. What this means is that we are working together to build our composition community. If you have not heard of the American Composers Forum, you can find more at composersforum.org, but it is the largest composer-oriented organization in the United States that has many resources, programs, and grant opportunities designed to help you build your career and to create your art. The biggest benefit I have gotten out of being an ACF member is the curated composer opportunity list. This might be the most extensive list that you can find anywhere, with opportunities for calls for scores, grants, and performance opportunities. So I highly recommend joining this organization. Again, you can learn more at composersforum.org. And I also want to invite you to join the Portfolio Composer community by becoming a Patreon sponsor. By joining the community, you will have access to private webinars that I do for the Patreon communities and students of my course, and as well as private coachings, one-on-one sessions, and a few other bonuses. So please go to patreon.com/Portfolio Composer.
Welcome to the lightning round.
All right, Jacob, if you could roll back the clock, what advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Don't stress too much and enjoy life. You can be much more creative when you're calm than when you're stressed.
Yeah, I hear that. What do you do to eliminate the stress and to bring on calm?
I eat with friends and family. Going out to dinner is, I think, one of the most enjoyable experiences in life.
There's something really powerful about that. I totally agree. Every major culture celebrates the act of breaking bread with people. There's something powerful in that.
It really is. Yeah, having dinner, even just my wife and I every night, is like the best way to relax. It's seriously amazing.
That's awesome. What is a personal habit of yours that you feel leads to your success?
Get up early.
Yeah?
I think that, getting up early. I studied with Ira Newborn at NYU, who scored The Naked Gun, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and tons of John Hughes films. He told me this when I moved out to LA. I said, I've got so much work, I don't know how I'm going to finish it. He said, easy. Get up at 4:30, put on a pot of coffee, and start. I said, 4:30? And he said, absolutely. He's like, because once it hits 10 a.m., your phone starts ringing, you get emails and text messages, you can't concentrate. And I've used that, and that is the single biggest reason that I've been able to accomplish everything. And don't get me wrong, a lot of days I'm up until 3 a.m., and so I can't get up before 8 or 9. There's no way. But when I can, I always try to reset my schedule, and I've gotten up at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and those early hours are when I'm most creative, and I'm not disturbed, and I'm calm, and I feel like I have the whole day ahead of me, and then I'm able to produce. Get up early.
That's wonderful.
My main advice.
I get up early too. So you're a saxophone player, but what instrument have you always wanted to learn to play, and why?
The violin. I'd say that as a composer, strings always mystified me, and I wish that I had played the violin as a kid and grown up sitting in an orchestra and just sort of like learning how the orchestra breathes and how how kind of varied strings can be. Because I feel like it's taken me 15 years to wrap my head around how to write for 2 strings as opposed to 60 as opposed to 10. The rabbit hole goes so deep that I'm jealous of composers who grew up playing the cello or the viola or the violin in orchestra. They're so far ahead of the game.
Yeah. What is one composition that had a profound impact on you, and why? And this doesn't have to be concert music. It can be film music, pop, or rock. But what I'm looking for are the pieces that took your breath away, caused you to pull the car over because you couldn't listen while driving, or just stopped time while you were listening.
That's a very easy question to answer for me. If any of you have ever seen the film Interview with the Vampire, the cue that opens that film is called Libera by Elliot Goldenthal. And it is an astounding piece of music because it has such a beautiful handling of small melodies that catch your ear, and it sounds ancient. It sounds, of course, like vampire music, but it's at the same time it sounds like it could be from a symphony. It's much more. It has much more value than I think an average film music cue. And when I heard it, I immediately bought the soundtrack when I left the theater, and I wore that cassette out, and then I had to buy it on CD. And I lost the CD and then bought it again on CD, and now I bought the MP3 album. It's still, to this day, one of the most inspiring pieces of music I've ever heard, just his handling of harmony and also how he pushes into different key centers. He doesn't stay in one key. It's been the main inspiration for me, and I always say, like, if I could get a chance to score a project like that someday, would be a dream come true.
Can you name a piece by a minority or film composer that you feel we should all listen to and know?
Yeah, I've been a huge Jennifer Hidgon fan, and I'd say anyone who's not familiar with Blue Cathedral, I would highly recommend checking that out. I think most people are probably familiar with it already. I think it's been performed hundreds of times in America by orchestras around. It might be one of the most popular new music pieces of the last 20 years. Yeah. But Blue Cathedral, Jennifer Hidgon, yeah.
I got to meet her recently, and she was so charming and warm and friendly. Just a tremendous person, too.
I met her once back at Peabody, and she came to give a master class, and I was chosen to present a piece that she had to critique and give me sort of a little 15-minute lesson. She ripped my piece to shreds, and I agreed with everything she said, and I thought that it was brilliant, all her advice. I never forgot her comments, and she wasn't mean or at all, but it was just quite obvious at the end, like, wow, I have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, she's a real master. It's great.
Yeah.
Can you name a book that could benefit the personal, creative, or business lives of the Portfolio Composer listeners, and why? And it doesn't have to be a book about music.
Yeah, this book I'm just finishing, and it's an amazing book. I recommend every human read it. It's called Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow by Yuval Noah Harari. I think he's won like tons of awards for his previous book called Homo Sapiens. Mm-hmm. And this book just talks about where we are as species now in history, and what kind of like the scene is set for our next phase. And he talks about sort of what challenges humans had facing all of us as a species up until now, and how technology and society has brought us to this point, and our future challenges and how we're going to deal with it, and our decisions just on a day-to-day, how we're carrying ourselves. It's totally fascinating. It's changed the way I look at the entire world.
Wow. Well, put it on my list. And where can people find you on the internet, and how can they get a hold of you?
The number one place to look me up, because everything else just changes so much, and the only one I keep up to date, is my personal website, jacobyoffeemusic.com.
That's 2 F's and 2 E's in Yoffee, right?
Just like coffee, like you drink coffee. Yep.
Right. Awesome. I like to end the podcast by just kind of opening the floor up. If you have any final thoughts or words of advice, or if there's something I didn't ask you want to talk about, now's your chance.
I will say advice for any composers looking to get into music for media, to act and think as a producer, because you're being hired by fellow creatives. And as much as you have to behave like a business, ultimately you're going to be working with an editor, a director, or a producer, somebody who is working really hard to create something with you. You're part of that creative team. And you can think about how you can help bring their vision to life in more ways than just your music. And I think any advice you can give, I've had directors who I've put them in touch with a great cinematographer, or I put them in touch with, someone who works in distribution, post-production, visual graphics. You can be more than just a musician. We are all people, and just because this is our sort of specialty doesn't mean that you can't act as, just a producer on a project and help bring something to life. And then you create a friend in someone who thinks of you more as just, oh, I hired that person and they did their job for me. Mm-hmm. So I'd always encourage people, act as a fellow producer.
I love it. Jacob, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your advice. I value it, and I value what you've shared with us. I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate it. Jacob, thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.